Our guest today is a force in the world of human rights and national security. She's an attorney, a strategic advisor, the president of Scarab Rising, and editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Her work shapes global policy conversations across continents. Please welcome the brilliant and fearless Irina Tsukerman.
The world is not black and white, that it's complicated, that there's a lot of nuance, that what seems like a simple decision when you're a child may be in some ways complicated.
I love this line, don't complicate things that are overtly simple, and you don't have to make that happen. When in that journey for that 8-year-old did that 8-year-old decide to become a human rights lawyer and a national security lawyer?
Actually, I was pretty young. I was only about 13 when I started moving in that direction. It took me some years to kind of finalize where it was going.
We're all becoming really protective of our national boundaries. We're all becoming, as countries, are very protective of who stays, where they stay, what do immigrants bring to a new country. And there's this fragmentation that I'm witnessing. How are you seeing this evolving nature of our planet?
The process is what matters. And this is what it's important to have an approach that doesn't infringe on the rights of other people, even as you are trying to defend and establish your own.
Sometimes human rights and national security are like opposing features, right? That you have to let go of maybe human rights to protect national law versus make sure that somewhere the national security is getting impinged. Welcome to another episode of the IgnitedNeurons Podcast. Today I have with me, Irina is someone who is the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider, and she deals with and writes about geopolitical issues from the Middle East and the North Africa region. And she's not only influencing that space, but I think she's helping craft that space too. So today we're going to speak about how this beautiful world of ours, which seems really hyper-connected in the 21st century with technology, but is still so massively fragmented. And we'll take what Irina feels is happening to the world right now and help us understand that better. Welcome, Irina, to the conversation.
Thank you, and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. And before we dive into any of our conversations around what kind of I hypothesized about, I think what's really important is we dive deep into who the guest is. And so the question that we start the podcast is that if that 8-year-old Irina, that 8-year-old little girl, wherever you were growing up, if that little girl were to come and meet you right now, what kind of a conversation do you think will emerge between the two of you?
Well, I really think that we have actually more in common than many people think they have with their childhood self. Because the one thing that I've tried to hang on from my childhood was being open-minded, being curious, and asking a lot of questions. And that is definitely something I used to do a lot. And I think my 8-year-old would be ecstatic to ask tons of questions about what happened, what I've learned from it, whether it was all worth it. Um, um, and I think I would have wanted to ask myself, the childhood self, I would have wanted to be reminded of kind of a more simple, more direct way of looking at things, somewhat less cynical,
Hmm.
and kind of remember the spirit of just looking at things when they're brand new, when you don't know anything about them, and you are able to view them as they are and make that initial assessment, that sort of excitement that is not in the sort of anticipation of what the future holds instead of dread, anxiety, existential angst, and rolling your eyes about, well, you know, how much, okay, that looks great, but how much is it going to cost, or what is it going to take to get there, or how long I'm going to have to deal with this? That sort of thing. I think there would be a great exchange with me, kind of trying to remember what motivated me back back at the time, and the young me wanting to see whether there's anything inspiring to look forward to, whether there are any lessons to be drawn from my experience that could kind of help channel that energy more successfully, more directly. I think that would be a fun discussion.
That's so beautiful. And I think the words that you're using, I hear this often, right? That as young kids, we're curious, we're open to asking questions. There's no judgment. There's no trying to figure out all the hows that we do as adults. What's your understanding? Like, where do these beautiful traits get lost on that journey?
Well, I've tried not to lose too much of it because, in terms of being direct, I literally am told that I kind of approach things in a very direct way. I don't burden myself with layers of social nuance, not in the way of not being completely tactless, of course, but simply trying to kind of speak as if I were speaking directly to people, just get what's on my mind off. And the intellectual curiosity, trying to be curious about things. I actually think that that quality can actually be developed more over time because in childhood we're actually limited by the exposure of our experience. And so certain things that we are not used to may seem hard or boring or uninspiring. And as we grow older and we force ourselves to expose to new things, we may discover things we never thought we might like. So I actually think that that sort of energy can be channeled. But there is also, of course, the reality that the world is not black and white, that it's complicated, that there's a lot of nuance, that what seems like a simple decision when you're a child may be in some ways complicated by the due to emotional challenges, due to the complexity of human nature, due to the fact that people are all different and have different experiences and may be motivated by different things or may see the world through the lens of their experiences. So that doesn't necessarily make them evil or great. It just makes them who they are, and it makes sense to try to understand that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to kind of try to balance some of that. You want to be able to understand different people's perspectives, and nuance is good. But on the other hand, what you don't want to do is complicate simple things beyond what they need to be. There are some things that are right and wrong. Treating people with decency, trying to be helpful, trying to be compassionate is never a bad thing. And that's something that we tend to forget behind these layers of protective mechanisms that we develop over time.
That's I love this line. Don't complicate things that are overtly simple, and you don't have to make that happen. And I think you're absolutely right. And we all have a very individual lens of looking at things based on our perspective, based on how we've grown up. But I think there are a few things like being decent, being kind, being empathetic, and being just present. I think these are things that we can absolutely take away. When in that journey for that 8-year-old, did that 8-year-old decide to become a human rights lawyer and a national security lawyer? Because that's a big title and a role and a word.
Actually, I was pretty young. I was only about 13 when I started moving in that direction. It took me some years to kind of finalize where it was going. First of all, I was interested in different cultures since I was a child. I was brought up that way. I was exposed to different things very early on, even before I was 8. So it came and it seemed to me that I was also naturally gravitating to it because I didn't find it boring. I found it exciting and interesting and compelling. So that aspect of it was always there. What happened was when I was 13, I was in junior high school here in the US, and we were reading a book called To Kill a Mockingbird, which featured a heroic lawyer who was standing up for justice and despite extreme social pressure to abandon his client. And I thought about that and I thought, look at that. This seems to be a way of preserving justice, of fighting for the right thing, of helping people who are otherwise voiceless, who are misrepresented by social trends and social injustices. And that's something that is a choice. This is something you can choose to do. This is not something dependent on how wealthy you are or how popular you are. This is a moral choice that you can bring into your profession. And that really kind of changed my way. I realized that I'm really excited to do that. And, you know, this is something that seems to be a natural fit, much more than what I thought I would be doing previously. And eventually I started seeing, well, how can I combine the sense of justice with my um, interest in international affairs? And that didn't happen all at once. It took many years to formulate, but I knew that I wanted to be doing some combination of those two things. Eventually, it came together for me in ways that I didn't even realize, could even happen because I ended up actually working on exactly these types of situations where people were falsely maligned, were standing up and trying to make the case for them was exceptionally difficult, where other institutions and people have failed them, and it's both exceptionally complicated, exceptionally frustrating at times, but also morally rewarding and exciting in many ways, exciting and challenging in a good way.
That's amazing. And then you remind me of the book How to Kill a Mockingbird. It's, I don't know, maybe 15 years, maybe 20 years ago that I think that'll be that long. Yeah, I vividly remember a little bit of that. But yeah, it was a powerful book at the time when I was reading it. And that's beautiful how certain childhood experiences can have like a pivotal impact on how you choose this journey. But then what's happening in the world right now, right? I mean, and you've seen it evolve over the last couple of decades. How do you feel about like, and I'll be like an audience who's say 40 years old, trying to figure out the world, who does not understand geopolitics really well. So what I'm seeing is that we're all becoming really protective of our national boundaries. We're all becoming, as countries, are very protective of who stays, where they stay, what do immigrants bring to a new country. And there's this fragmentation that I'm witnessing. How are you seeing this evolving nature of our planet?
And look, whether you're just a regular person operating on an individual level or a nation state, there's always going to be a conversation about boundaries and balancing your specific personal or state interests with community interests, global interests. And that's a normal thing. And there's always going to be a different balance depending on the circumstances, depending on your position, your experiences, your needs at any given moment. What is different is how you resolve these concerns, whether you do it through dialogue and discussion, and whether you approach it in an informed, open minded way, whether you weigh all the pros and cons to determine where that line should be drawn, or whether you jump into it impulsively, aggressively, whether you discount and dismiss other perspectives. And that's true whether you're just a regular person living your own life and figuring out your neighbor's boundary between your two houses, or whether you're state actors trying to figure out demarcation of borders, or whether you're trying to discuss the limits of migration and migration policies or something like that. There's always going to be a question of how do you balance your relationship with the outside world, with other interests. But the bottom line is the process matters more than the outcome. The outcome will always be adjusted to some extent, but the process is what matters. And this is what it's important to have an approach that doesn't infringe on the rights of other people, even as you're trying to defend and establish your own.
Hmm. That's very interesting. So you're saying, and I love how you compare it to as an individual. I'll also be protective of my boundaries, and if someone is infringing those boundaries, then my like spider senses will be activated, and that's the same for the nation states. On the process, you're saying. So you're saying the process matters more than the outcomes. It seems really logical that people should choose dialogue, people should choose having conversations, debates, writing treaties over wars. But still, in this day and age, we're still seeing so many wars sprout in different parts of the world. What's the need
That's
for these?
so by process, I don't just mean that process of conventional dialogue, but it also means having policies and process in place when your neighbor is doing something, that cannot be resolved easily. Do you file a lawsuit? Do you erect a border? Do you call the police? If there is no police, what measures can you do to protect yourself? To send a message of deterrence for the neighbor to stop doing what they're not supposed to if they're not listening to you, not resolving it amicably. At what point do you draw the line? How do you manage escalation in your relations? And again, that's as true on an individual level as on a state level, except the stakes are higher and the means are different. But the concept is the same. The concept is to be able to think ahead, be proactive, get ahead of the problem before it becomes unmanageable and overwhelming and involves and it starts affecting other people besides yourself and your neighbor.
I understand what you're saying. This the space that you've operated in human rights and understanding these geopolitical challenges. This seems to be a space which is very like you would put every foot very carefully because you might tread on lines that may not make people happy. Where do you find the courage to have these conversations openly, Irina?
You are going to make mistakes. If you're doing anything that is high stakes, you're going to mess up. And there is going to be a point where your judgment fails you. You don't have enough information. Other people get in the way. You get frustrated and mishandle something. It's going to happen. The question is not to be. The question is, are you going to be so risk averse and afraid of making an error that it's going to paralyze you and keep from acting when the situation calls for it, or whether you are going to say, what can I learn from this experience? How can I do better? What steps can I take to make sure that in the future this does not happen? What people am I going to surround myself with, whose judgment I respect, who I can consult with before doing something, and who can inspire me, and whose example I can emulate, or whose mistakes I may try to avoid.
Hmm.
So you're never going to get that perfect answer. Very rarely you're going to have the outcome that's exactly what you want. But you can generate a lot of goodwill by approaching it in good faith, with open-minded, with humility, willingness to listen more than talk sometimes. Also, willingness to correct your course when you realize you're off the mark somewhere. You're not going to be perfect, but the question is, are you going to be operating in good faith and willing to challenge yourself and willing to be self-aware and to grow? Or are you going to double down no matter what happens just to get what you want or what you think you want?
Yeah, these are some powerful questions because they're very beautifully reframing the attachment that we have to outcomes. That whatever I do should be perfect. This perfectionism that comes in, and so you're asking that instead of when you fail, which is bound to happen when you're doing something that's important, that's critical for the world, what can you learn from the situation? What can or who can you consult with? Who can be your inner circle? Who can guide you? And are you operating in good faith? I think these are really powerful questions. What also comes to mind is like sometimes human rights and national security are like opposing features, right? That you have to let go of maybe human rights to protect national law versus make sure that somewhere the national security is getting impinged. How do you handle the paradox between the two? Or is there one? Like that's what I'm assuming.
I don't see it as a paradox, and I don't see the conflict. In my opinion, some of the worst human rights violators are also tend to be national security threats for other um countries and people, or if they're organizations, they play a malign role, because the people who don't respect basic um or who don't try to at least improve on the basic rights of human beings will also not necessarily in their own country or with whoever challenges them, will also not be respectful of other people's concerns and will act accordingly. It's a range. There's no perfect quote unquote human rights metric. There's always a balance, and there's going to be disagreement what is and isn't a human right, and to what extent you are obligated to preserve it. But there is a basic understanding that you can't simply kill everybody who disagrees with you for whatever reason that makes you a bad person and a bad government, unresponsive to the citizens. At the same time, you simply cannot allow people to simply ignore laws and to do whatever they want whenever they feel like it. So there is always going to be a regulation of how much force you need to use to prevent something from escalating. At what point are you facing a legitimate threat, and how do you handle it legitimately? And at what point there is some room for criticism that you're just going to have to accept, and some room for disagreement, and some room for activity that you don't particularly care for, that you're just going to have to live with. It's always going to be a balance. But again, the question is the process. Is there a process to determine what actions represent your values and what message you want to convey, versus whether you're simply being reactive, whether you're operating out of fear and paranoia, and whether you're prioritizing on your own immediate self-interest above everyone else's and ignoring other people's concerns and rights. So nobody is going to be perfect, but the countries that are law-abiding and generally respectful of the concept, they will be making a very clear and obvious effort
Hmm.
to improve, to figure things out. And I think sometimes people try too hard to, you know, to say, oh well, if you haven't done that perfectly, you're a hypocrite that you're demanding it. Nobody's going to be perfect, and people will have different disagreements on what is and isn't. So that's not necessarily hypocrisy. What is hypocrisy is that if you are throwing any idea of legal mechanisms down the chute, and then you expect everyone else to comply with your demands, then you're a hypocrite. But as long as you're making a reasonable effort and it's very obvious that you are trying, having differences of opinion with others and trying to advance your own perspective and your own arguments and your own values, there's nothing wrong with that.
That's interesting. In a couple of in that sharing, you use the word disagreement. I'm also seeing that it seems that the world is countries as their own states. They're polarized, but this ability of human beings to disagree intelligently, to disagree with empathy, I think has, in my perception, gone down. How are you seeing this change over the last few years?
There's a combination of factors. You have the boundless freedom of social media combined with the lack of appropriate introduction and skill building at an early age that would prepare people to deal with this overwhelming new social communication mechanism. So it's the combination of those two things intersecting that is creating a moral confusion, intellectual confusion, lack of critical thinking skills, lack of basic moral compass, lack of guidance, wrong priorities, combined with a mechanism that can be used for good, but easier to use for not so good, for manipulation, for deception, for disagreements. That's what's creating this current havoc. It's not just social media; it's also other institutions being misdirected, weaponized in various ways. But the bottom line is, if you do not have the basic ability to ask yourself critical questions about what do you believe in, who benefits from a particular perspective and messaging and points of view, and are you willing to challenge the information that is being presented and to look for alternative explanations, or are you simply buying into whatever you see at face value? Unless you have that basic attitude, you are inevitably going to be dragged down a black hole of confusing, conflicting messaging priorities. You end up being echo chambered, isolated, and overwhelmed.
Yeah, I love this term. So the boundless freedom of social media you spoke about, and that's intersecting with what is the second thing that you spoke about? The second angle there?
Lack of preparation, lack of moral compass, critical thinking skills, essential ability to separate the human from the question, from the issue, to be able to respect human beings and their right to have different opinions, from also having disagreements and also questioning motives and figuring out whether or not the people are talking to you in good faith. Where is that argument coming from? Who's benefiting from it? Basically, being able to think critically, but also to act humanely at the same time.
And this boundless freedom and the boundless content that's being created without the ability of critical thinking, without sharing and understanding it properly, is going to lead to all that confusion that you're speaking about.
I would say so. I think it's inevitable that people, when faced with unfettered information and messaging, they're going to be disoriented. They're going to follow what's easier, and they're going to naturally gravitate to what they think is emotionally fitting and what appeals to their instincts and to what they're used to.
Yeah.
And that's not always the right thing to do.
As you're seeing technology go faster and faster, content being created, now AI just exploding all of that, how have you seen this information spread, the need to of traditional media? What's the shift that you're observing?
Look, at the end of the day, this is not the first industrial revolution we've been through. And we've had many times, at least in US history, but also internationally, Media that failed to do the job, media that was sensationalist, that thrived on scandals and false rumors and hearsay, that is nothing new. What's new is scale and scope and, you know, the people who should be, who are, you know, educated or think have access to the greatest level of free information in the world, making the choices to focus on, I don't know, cat videos on TikTok or something like that. So it's almost, we've, at various points in times, we've had clearly delineated moral, intellectual, political leadership. Now those boundaries are being blurred alongside those mechanisms. So on the one hand, there's a lot more freedom for different people to take part in the social system, in figuring out that leadership and figuring out their roles in society. But on the other hand, when everyone's trying to be a leader, no one actually ends up being one. And I'm seeing a failure of people to clearly stand up for the right thing, to clearly show a better way to deal with this whole mess. Conceptually, nothing is new. Maybe the scale is different. We have more people now than we've had 100 years ago. We have more diverse societies, greater, faster technology, greater and more integrated communications. But the issues have not changed. The way the media has tried to capitalize on all of that has not changed. Trying to figure out what the truth is, that's always been there. But the fact that people are confused about what defines a leader, what is the right thing, this sort of, confusion that comes from a lot of focus on feelings and not enough focus on substance, that's something that's creating a dangerous situation.
And you're speaking about media, it's really hard also, I feel like, to differentiate between media that's like legitimate and you can trust versus media that's propaganda paid for, whatever, like whatever that looks like. What's something that you can share with someone who's listening right now to differentiate between what's real versus what's maybe fake news?
Skeptical, because even outlets that try to do a good job can make mistakes. And even outlets with agenda can have information that is of value if only to understand the objectives and agenda of whoever is passing it on. But that doesn't mean, but always use your own mind, verify, and have an approach of asking, what is the record of this publication? What is their approach? Are they generally asking critical questions? Are they using sources that are consistent? Are they using diverse sources, or are they relying on the same type of regurgitated material? Who benefits from their perspective? Who is finances and funds this medium? What is it that I'm not seeing in the story? Yeah, questions like that. Questions that force you to examine what kind of information you're actually getting and what is missing. Has the journalist done their own investigation, or are they just relying on social media quotes that somebody else wrote and they're just recycled?
That's very. I love this advice. Always be skeptical, because then you're questioning and then you're curious to learn more, which will then uncover the truth for you at some point. In your work, you've interviewed diplomats. You've spoken to so many people, right? And is there a story that you feel, or an experience that you feel like was really transformational, or left an impact on you, which you can share?
In terms of talking to people, it's not that there is one specific incident, but the entire process has been transformational because it forced me to interact with people whom I wouldn't necessarily always choose to have spoken to. Because when I come into an interview, I don't know exactly what the person is going to say. I do not script my conversations. I mean, I can come up with a list of questions to as prompts, but I certainly can't, don't free write the discussion. It's free flowing because I want to have that freedom to ask follow up questions and to hear what the person will say at the moment where they're confronted with a surprise discussion.
Hmm.
So it has challenged me in many ways. It has forced me to confront people who are to the world in a very different way, who I disagreed with very passionately. And at the same time, it forced me to learn a lot in ways that challenged my own assumptions and beliefs. And I realized after a while of doing this, it did not happen quickly, but over time, I realized that it was making me a better interviewer, more informed person, and someone more open to actual different perspectives and more prepared to face different sort of discussions and conversations, including ones that would normally be highly contentious and that I may have been tempted to walk away from. But it also forced me to consider that even people I'm extremely disagreeing with may have a point that I may wish to consider, even as for ethical reasons, for reasons of simple informational, difference, am tempted to otherwise put aside and not, accept.
Hmm.
Even having a discussion with each person, you can always learn something. You can learn whether they're you can learn what they put into the interview, what they want to bring to the table.
Yeah.
So it's always something new, and I think I've become less focused on the outcomes and getting the points that I want to get out of the interview, and more interested in the process itself and in what I can learn and the surprises that await me, and how that discussion changes my perspective and informs me.
That's very interesting. You're speaking about the future. What is your perspective of the future? Is the future more peaceful, more conflicted? What's your perspective?
I think it's going to be both. I think as human beings, you have tremendous opportunities and means for problem solving,
Hmm.
for creating our own messes, but also fixing them. And I think we'll see that as many people as there are creating problems and using opportunities of poor leadership, confusion, and all of these things to cause a bigger havoc and to advance their own interest at everyone else's expense, there will be just as many people emerging, looking to solve those issues and figure out better ways. That gives me hope because I think eventually problem solving prevails. Human beings evolved over time. They managed to survive great upheavals due to these inherent abilities and this gravitation. And even when everything seems dark and hopeless and confused, there will always be people with moral compass and curiosity trying to solve problems, trying to learn from each other, trying to figure it all out and connect with each other and find each other no matter how far apart they may seem to be and how different they may seem to be. The people with that moral compass and with that attitude, they'll find each other sooner or later, even if it seems isolating, difficult, and so forth. Those character traits, they bring people together from wherever they are, and together they're much more powerful force than the forces of entropy causing this kind of chaos and destruction.
Yeah. So we'll create the mess, and then we'll be the ones who'll clean it up. And there'll be forces in the world who will be more responsible towards building this mess. But then there are people, you're saying, who will have that moral compass, who will have the curiosity, who will come in and continue to improve things. And both of us hope that the strength of these people is much higher than the first one.
I think so, because the people who are looking to create mayhem, being destructive is easier than building something up, but it's also creating disorder also doesn't lead you anywhere at the end of the day. Whereas when you're trying to create something, you're really motivated and you have a sense of order that helps you make sense of things in ways that is exceptionally powerful, in my opinion.
Yeah, love it. As you're talking about the future, and as we come towards the closure of this conversation we're having, say the 80-year-old Irina now, the Irina from a few decades from now, if that 80-year-old self were to come and speak to you right now, what would her advice be to you?
I think care a lot less about what people think and about comparing yourself to what everyone else is doing and just do what you need to do and focus on what you can bring. Because the only thing you can control at the end of the day is your own response, your own initiative, your own ethics, and your own choices. You can't control what everyone else is doing, how they will perceive you, how they will judge you, what they will do for you, and how whether or not they'll be helpful or, good. Only you can control only yourself. You can change only your own attitude towards things. You can try to be helpful. You can try to reach out. You can try to manage things. What you can not do is force anyone else to do what you want. All you can do is adjust yourself and figure out different ways and figure out whether it's a course worth pursuing or whether you want to go in a different direction. That's entirely up to you.
Yeah. Love it. I think that's such powerful advice. And it's really easy to give that advice out to self, but it's so hard to
Yes, I am actually the only reason I'm saying that is because I honestly keep losing track of that, and I'm often so frustrated about different things, and I'm always wondering, well, I mean, I haven't reached this in my career to compared to all these famous and high profile individuals, so that means I'm doing something wrong. But what if I'm not doing something wrong? Maybe the reason I'm where I am is because what I'm doing requires this and will have those natural consequences, and I have to give up some of those things in order to be able to focus on whatever it is I chose.
Hmm, that's amazing. And to all our listeners who are with us in the 40th minute, it's the 8-year-old Irina is really wise and has a lot of wisdom. So listen to her. Stop comparing yourself to others. Don't think of what others would perceive of you. All you control is what you can do, and I think that's the path you want to be on. The second thing that you shared, Irina, which I think I want to kind of reiterate, is that people with moral compass and curiosity will save the world. So we don't have to be too worried about what's happening, and we can, in whatever ways we can, try to improve things and always be skeptical. Always
People.
we can be those people.
Exactly, because anyone can choose to be curious and anyone can choose to figure out the right way to treat people and to go about.
Love
It might not be easy, but you can get on that path at least.
Yeah,
That's something that's up to anybody. You don't have to have special powers. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be ultra rich. Anyone can do this in their own way.
yeah. Start small, be skeptical, be curious, be open-minded. And that's why, the question that we ask in the podcast, the 8-year-old and the 8-year-old, I think these are the two people that always, I think we should always aspire to be answerable to, because they were the true versions of who we are and where we're going. Amazing.
I agree. I just hope that I can live up to my own advice.
Yeah, yeah. One day at a time. Stay skeptical and keep asking, what am I learning? What am I learning here? Amazing. To everyone who's listening, we'll put in all the links about Irina and where you can find her on the show notes. If you're still here, that means the conversation was helpful to you. Share with someone who you think will enjoy this. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to us. We want to get to wherever we get to. It's the journey that we're enjoying. But share this with someone who you think will benefit from this conversation that Irina and I had. Irina, thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.